I'm working on writing. Ever since I was young, I've loved a good story. I really enjoy the storytelling aspect of the world, of the Bible. And there's a character I love specifically that, no offense to the people in church who are preaching right now, but my love for this character is not getting dug into the way I wanted to, and that character is David. I love the story. I had a physics professor who did a Bible study with us, and we just dove really deep into the story and character of David, and I recognize that we have to go shallow if we're skimming over the top of 1st and 2nd Samuel, but there's so much. And so I've written a, not probably entirely biblically accurate, telling of a scene that I imagined as we were talking, as I was listening to the sermon a few weeks ago. And I think it encapsulates some of the things I appreciate about David's story, and then I'll follow it up so you'll see the transition. It will be very obvious, and move into the second part, and you'll understand when I get there. The door swung open to a sickening scene of blood and death. The metallic stench assaulted David's nostrils, overwhelming everything except the sight of his son. Amnon's crumpled body laid on the floor, a vibrant pool of crimson spreading from the point where Absalom's blade had ended his life. David rushed in, ignoring the cries of his attendants as he scooped Amnon's limp head into his arms. Joab silenced them, thankfully. Amnon, David crooned, quietly running his fingers through Amnon's hair. My son. He choked back quiet sobs, trying to stay composed, but he couldn't control the shaking of his chest. The moment seemed to stretch into eternity, blood running over David's hands. To his eyes, the fresh blood washed over pre-stained hands, a memory of Uriah. When the trembling became too much, David looked away from the blood, the memories, and the body of his son. He raised his eyes to the ceiling and howled his anguish for the world to hear. After a long minute, the guttural wail eventually died in his throat, leaving David's voice rough and weak. Why? He whispered, directing his words to the Lord. David knew he'd been heard. Yahweh never stopped listening. A feeling of certainty and dread washed over him. While David couldn't hear anything audibly, a new presence seemed to respond. You know why, it seemed to say. David looked down in disgust, the phantom blood of Uriah standing out. Amnon hadn't been innocent, and David was well aware, but still. Did he deserve to die? David asked, spitting the question like an accusation. Don't I? The attendants in the room began to shuffle audibly, their discomfort plain. Let them see, David thought bitterly. Let them be uncomfortable. My son is dead. Why should anyone feel comfort? Give the king space, Joab's voice called out, followed by the sound of feet moving and people exiting the room. David recognized the play, getting the people to leave in order to preserve David's image. Can't let the king be seen to weep for a rapist, David thought despondently, even if that rapist was his son. He didn't care. David knew Joab was being smart, but for once in his life, David didn't care about the politics of his situation. Would you not scorn any other father in your situation? David's guilt whispered in the dark parts of his mind. Would you not call for the same justice on any other man? David groaned, pulling Amnon's body close. No, he began to say, but stopped himself. Nathan's declaration rang in David's head, the words of the Lord condemning him. You are that man. David slumped over Amnon's body, tears collecting in the corner of his eyes. I should be dead, not Amnon. He squeezed his eyes shut, the tears finally escaping to zip down David's face. My actions led to this. Sir, that's not true, Joab interjected, his voice jerking David back to reality. David swung his gaze to meet that of his most loyal man. But it is, David replied, shaking his head regretfully. The presence of the Lord seemed to echo David's thought. Nathan's words cursing David seemed to emanate from it. Strife had finally wormed its way into David's family, the family he'd worked so hard to build and protect, and it was all David's fault. You didn't encourage Amnon to bed Tamar unlawfully, Joab tried to explain, but David scoffed. Didn't I? He said, voice growing hard. Joab faltered. David's crime wasn't common knowledge. In fact, it was quite well hidden, but Joab knew. David met Joab's eyes until the man looked away shamefully. David looked the other way, trying in vain to hide his own look of shame and guilt. His eyes wandered, searching desperately to find something, anything, to look at as memories started to cloud his vision. A reluctant woman, a drunken friend, a lifeless baby, all flashing in David's mind, obscuring any other thoughts and driving David deeper into the darkness. Are you not forgiven? A stern yet regal voice chided him. David snapped his head up, looking to the ceiling. Joab flinched back, hand going to a knife at his belt. Sir, he asked hesitantly. Am I forgiven, Lord? David asked, pointedly ignoring Joab. His general grunted and slowly removed his hand from the knife handle. Joab acknowledged Yahweh, but he didn't believe, not the way David believed. Joab knew what it was like to be political and crafty, not how to trust the Lord. That had always been Jonathan, David's dearest friend. Jonathan was dead, as well as two of David's sons. I don't feel forgiven, David cried. He tightened his fists in anger, frustration beginning to boil up. Without warning, the Lord's presence went from comforting to enraged, as energy condensed in the room like a storm. The gathered power was so great that even Joab, who often missed the Lord's hand, noticed, shied to the edge of the room. David stared down the empty room, imagining a figure in the storm's epicenter. Is this what forgiveness looks like? David screamed, trying to be heard over the ever-increasing hum of anger. Is this justice? That he should die and I should live? While we both committed the same sin, Amnon's lot is to die? David didn't need the overwhelming hum of power to know he was wrong. The minute the words left his mouth, he knew they weren't true. David's life was proof of forgiveness. Amnon's death was a justice beyond what David knew. Absalom didn't have the right to execute that justice, but who was David to judge? He also committed Absalom's sin. Something changed in the room as a portion of the Lord pulled itself away from the wreck. The feeling of being sheltered washed over David as the separate portion of Yahweh moved between David and the Lord's anger. An unearthly, unknowable peace came over him, the feeling of being loved by God. In the next moment, the tension of the storm was released, power washing over everything like a crushing tide. Joab was thrown back against the wall, and while David felt the oppressive, immense force behind the storm, he was protected from the brunt of the display. After what felt like an eternity of rushing, howling winds, the Lord's wrath was gone. Are you forgiven? The protective force seemed to ask pointedly. Yes, David acknowledged quietly. I am forgiven. Sir? A panicked servant cried, bursting into the room. Are you okay? David nodded once. Joab groaned, knocked unconscious by the blast. Help him, David commanded quietly. The servant looked over David nervously, but decided it wasn't worth arguing with the king. David laughed to himself. I should take example from this man. The servant helped Joab sit up, placing his back to the wall. When the general had been revived enough, the servant turned an uncertain gaze back to David. What is it? David asked, his voice assuming a practiced, regal air that David had grown accustomed to using. Well, sir, the man stammered, I was bringing news before... He trailed off uncertainly. David waited a moment before clearing his throat. Right, I have news of Absalom. David stiffened, afraid of the man's next words. He was spotted fleeing into the wilderness. David hung his head. Running from his crime, he said sorrowfully. My king, you didn't, Joab began, but David cut him off. Didn't I? The words hung in the air unchallenged. Joab knew when a battle was lost. Like all great commanders, he cut his losses and began planning for the next battle. So what will you do now? Joab asked David. What can I do? If I condemn Amnon, I condemn myself. The same is true for Absalom. I can't pick a side. Maybe, Joab began hesitantly, you can forgive Absalom? David looked sharply at the general. He hadn't realized Joab had caught any of the confrontation between David and the Lord. David choked weakly. I don't know. He looked down at Amnon. Had David forgiven Amnon? Had there been time before Absalom's blade? When it was clear David wasn't going to respond, Joab gathered the servant and exited the chamber, leaving David to his thoughts. Have I forgiven myself? David wondered. I have forgiven you, the Lord's representative seemed to say. David held back sobs. That is enough. Unable to hold them in, David bent down, his head down, resting his forehead on Amnon's cold face. Finally, alone and forgiven, David wept. And I was hoping for a music stand for this part, but looks like I'm winging it. So, much like this song, because I'm no musical genius, I sing or I play. I rarely do both. So we'll get the idea, and then if I stop playing, I'll pick up playing as I continue singing, because that's the one I'm better at.
Your blood is on my hands, drying next to the blood of an old friend. Your head is in my arms, slain by the hand of a brother. Where was God last night? I will try, but I can't seem to understand why I'm alive when so much death and destruction surrounds me. It feels so wrong, it feels like it's all my fault. I know I'm not clean, my crimes have led me to this. So for now I'm stuck in the waiting and weeping. My son is in your hands, running from crimes he's committed. I don't know what to do, 'cause I've done the same crime too, yet I'm still alright. I can't see who I am supposed to be. Am I a father or king? How do I act justly? I ask you, Lord, I can't focus on this much more. I need your help to tell me what to do. Until then, I'm stuck in the waiting and weeping. My life is in your hands. My sons are in your hands. All of the crimes we've committed. Though I try, I can't seem to accept your grace. You've forgiven all my mistakes and all of my transgressions. I trust you in everything you're gonna do, because I know that you've got me and you're writing my story. But for now I'm stuck. Once again I'm stuck. Finally I'm struck in the waiting and weeping.